Hello and welcome to part 3 of the explainer video on the Embracing Risk framework. Obviously, as I said in the last one, if you haven't seen the others, you might want to go back and check them out. It gives a bit of the big picture. In this video, we're going to go into more detail about what shifting organizational language and focus looks like. And essentially, this element is about shifting the supporting kind of beliefs, if you will. And I mentioned in the early one, it's not so much trying to convince people that risk is a good idea. It's more giving the context as to what's the viable alternative and why, and then giving some of the specific, language changes and tools and, dare I say it, kind of tricks and techniques and stuff that leaders and workers can use for this. So I'm going to talk kind of broadly first here and say that obviously I talked about the artifact first that we end up sort of typically producing. So what this looks like is a number of steps. Partly it is about embracing risk. Now that may sound easier than said, but it probably is more about this idea of, can we do things in the name of safety that can unintentionally increase risk? And also, are we okay with the idea that we're never actually going to solve safety? That no matter how much planning we do, no matter how much training we do, we're never going to solve or fix safety, whatever safety even is. And that's the wicked problem stuff in there. So there is a need for organizations. Now, by the way, they don't have to. I'm saying that I think cultural maturity comes from embracing risk, and embracing risk means accepting that some problems are unsolvable. Now, it doesn't mean we give up on them. So wicked problems theory is about, or wicked problems thinking is about, first of all, being able to say, there are some problems that are so complex, essentially, that they can't ever be solved. But importantly, it's about this sort of framing question of, could it be problematic if we treat an unsolvable problem as if it's solvable? Could that create problems? And that's a really critical one, because in some areas of safety, we treat it as if it's solvable. Now, that's, as an extreme end, that's seen in zero. So essentially, even striving for zero means somewhere people think it's achievable to solve it. But even practically, if the ongoing corrective actions and solutions that are put up when there's a safety issue are around planning or training or knowledge or documentation, that kind of hints towards the thought that, well, we just didn't have enough. I mean, behavioral safety is the same, where we kind of go, you just weren't committed enough. Safety is a choice you make. If only you were committed enough to safety, if only you had a big enough reason to be safe. And all of that thinking kind of primes that there must be a solution, and there just isn't. It's just too complex. So wicked problems theory comes out of big social problems where you've got lots of different people who don't even agree on what the problem is. And I come back and say, what's safety about? And I get all these different sort of ideas from that. So I ask leaders to embrace the idea that safety is a wicked problem. We won't solve it, but it doesn't mean we give up. But we apply a specific set of strategies that are appropriate for wicked type problems, as opposed to, when you've got a big engineering problem, you apply different strategies because you know there's a solution. Now, these strategies include chunking the problem down. So at a broad level, this would be, instead of trying to tackle safety, you try to tackle communication or resourcing or systems. You just chunk it down, right? You also, by the way, need an agreed stopping point. This is a big thing in wicked problems. If you know there's no final, end point, then you have to pick an end point. Now in safety, because safety is so anchored to harm, we end up with this flow through of, that's how we end up back at, we have to reduce all injuries. And that's how we end up at zero. But if you anchor to risk, the idea is there an agreed stopping point? And there is. That's what as far as reasonably practicable is about. It's actually based in the legislation. The legislation assumes there will be some residual risk. It assumes that you cannot manage out all risk. It says protects people's safety, but it says to do that, you manage risk as far as reasonably practicable. And with that, it's interesting, if you go to ISO 31000, the definition of risk that's used in that is risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. So in that case, that definition doesn't necessarily mean there's no such thing as, that not that you can't solve everything. But broadly, what it's saying for me is risk is about uncertainty and objectives. So as a risk manager or as a leader, I want to be more certain that my objectives will be met. When I'm 100% certain, which I would argue you can't be in nearly all situations because it's so complex. So that's the wicked problems bit. But unless you can be 100% certain, there's always risk. And that's about embracing that and going, okay, well, what do we do then? The argument from ISO 31000 is the best you can do is be more certain or confident, which also then, by the way, engages in risk intelligence thinking. So risk intelligence thinking is about thinking not whether I like risk decisions, but it's about being accurate. So how confident am I in my risk decision? Do I think that's an acceptable risk? Yes or no? How confident am I that I've made the right choice? Oh, I'm only 20% confident. You know, that's a totally different way of thinking, and that's what risk intelligence thinking promotes, is sort of confidence and certainty. So within that model, then again, we think about areas where we're more certain or less certain, which in itself is a way of thinking about risk, but also it says, what's your objective? Now, the problem, as I said before, is your objective can't be to be safe, because it can't be to get home. Safety's too broad. So we use the wicked problems strategy of chunking, where we say we want to be more certain that we are engaging with the right people, we are feeling supported and trusted, that we're managing our risk, that we've got the right equipment, that we're planning well, that we're using our systems appropriately. You chunk it down and shift your certainty, shift your objective onto that. It is a very kind of soft approach, but when brought together, it really shifts the thinking and gives a more meaningful way to focus on safety. You can incorporate social psychology of risk principles into all of this stuff. So that means embracing humans, embracing fallibility over error. It means understanding the power of priming and framing in languaging. So a classic problem that exists in most organizations I work with, and I'm generalizing here, is if I had a checking process, which is a safety activity, and I gave them a checklist, we give people checklists, which is meant to be like a shopping list, right? A thinking tool. So you've got check and checklist. If somebody's pushed for time and they're going to make a trade-off and be like, which one should I do? Which one's more important? If I ask senior leaders, which one's more important, the check or the checklist? Then I know they say both, but if I push it, then they'll say the check, because that's fundamentally a safety process. Missing a checklist, nobody's gone to jail because of that. I know it causes issues. There's a lot of mythology about it, but it's just a missed checklist, to be honest, right? So missing a check could be really critical. The question is, when thinking about frontline staff or contractors and reflecting from leaders, is what do you think they think you think? And most leaders, in my experience, go, they probably think that we want the checklist. So that's an example of where we've balanced things the wrong way, and that's through priming. That's understanding that priming. And it's happened simply through our questions. What's the first question they get asked all the time? Where's that paperwork? Where's that checklist? Now, the strategy then actually comes out of the same thing. So what we do is we teach leaders to shift their language. How did the inspection go this morning? Did anything come up during the pre-start? What did you notice during the walk around? You just shift it, and it's using priming, but it's understanding that all these effects are happening there, that humans are influenced by language. They've got heuristics that make them really fast and efficient, but can also sort of sometimes catch us out. But generally speaking, heuristics that, keep us alive. That we have all these biases that influence the way we see the world. That understanding how motivations and goals actually work, and that when we motivate somebody by paying them more, or we say you have to do 5 safety observations a month, otherwise this will look bad on your performance, that they will decide what's best for them and go, well, hang on, these safety observations, I have 100 safety observations a month, and you're making me record 5 of them. So really it's just a tick and flick activity, so I'll just do 5. So now you've got a data being created that's meaningless. And that's perfectly sensible for a person to do. I know you might not like it, but it's sensible, and I understand why, because of the psychology behind it. We understand adult learning principles, and so we reframe the way we try and teach people. We don't teach people's brains as a data dump and just shove everything in and expect them to know it. We use different meaningful techniques for it. We understand sense making and conscious and non-conscious thinking. We understand semiotics, which is where language and signs and symbols sort of have a meaning and talk to people. So we use appropriate languaging, and we think about our signage and our colors and a whole range of stuff. There's a lot obviously in that, but that's what happens when you shift towards embracing sort of risk and fallibility in people. I think that this shift provides a basis for better supporting chronic unease and high reliability organising. I talked about that in the first video, and anti-fragility. So ways of minimising us over systemising and creating risk when we think we're not creating risk, that unexpected thing, particularly the understanding fragility does that. But that basis for supporting chronic unease by offsetting, if we accept that things should never be 100% certain, that straight away is a way of offsetting hubris or overconfidence in the organisation, which means you're automatically in a slightly better spot to see weak danger signals, for people to go, wait a minute, this doesn't feel right, and to be listened to as well. But that's why it's about embracing and accepting risk at the core of it. It incorporates a view of safety as multidisciplinary. So embracing risk is not a solution or a strategy in itself. It's because it's a cultural focus, it's developed within a social psychology view, but it's not like, as part of this process, you still need to do risk management work. So that might be you need process safety, or you need hygiene, or you want to adopt, for your learning, you might want to adopt learning teams approach and adopt some HOP principles in there. I think it's got to be, you debate what's the nature of the problem and what strategy or solution has a particular strength in that area, but understanding that there's trade-offs and compromises in all of this stuff. I think it helps with this, what I call the culture paradox. So this is another broad area that organisations talk about culture a lot. I know there's some debate within the industry, but I think culture's real, and I think it's relevant when it comes to safety. It gets implicated in every big stuff up that happens, and all big investigations and commissions and all that sort of stuff. The interesting challenge is when we ask people, what's culture about? Anybody can describe what it's like, but it's really hard to define, turns out. Like when you say, what do you mean by culture? Get everything from, it's the vibe, to culture's the way we do things around here, to people describing what they think culture should look like. Now, for me, what I've discovered in this is, well, there's no definition of culture. There's no one single definition. So when I'm working with organizations, what I suggest they need to do is, first of all, have a working concept. So if senior leaders want to intentionally work on culture, they need to have an aligned general idea. Like that's my sort of thesis going forward. So I think they need to look at there's a few different models. I use up to 5 different culture models, but my kind of core definition, and I've done another video on this, by the way, but my kind of core definition is typically shared beliefs that are learnt by groups, considered valid enough to then be taught to others. And so that's how culture develops and exists and is shared. But I also use Hudson's maturity model, Rob Long's culture as a cloud, Carl Veek's high reliability organising, and also Cameron and Quinn's competing values framework for understanding different things that are going on at a cultural level from there. And finally, I think that shifting to risk is entirely consistent with legislation. I think that the Act says, the objects of the Act are to, provide for the safety and protection of people, but it says the method you use is to manage risk as far as reasonably practicable. It assumes there will be some residual risk. So rather than getting fixated on the outcome, we should focus on the method or the process. And I know it feels like, well, maybe some of you might think it feels like that in safety, but I think that's not true. I actually think we get over-focused on the outcome because we overreact to something where there was an injury, and then we'll underreact when it wasn't. We end up overcorrecting in areas. We get fixated on frequency, not severity. Now, I know there are strategies that try and tackle this, and we've got strategies that try to engage more with people. We have strategies that try to get us to focus on more of the positive stuff, but nearly all of them come from within a systems thinking framework. And I love systems and I love data, but it can only achieve so much. Sometimes we need to say, what if that's a foundation? What if we keep some systems, we keep some measurement, but we need a different set of solutions or strategies focused in a different area? And we need to, again, like a maturity model, we need to treat it as a foundation. So some of this stuff you can't systemize, in my opinion. It needs to be back to a people-led thing. And that's where it aligns with, what if people were the source of safety? So what I say is, what if our goal was to not tell people how to be safe, but support people to make the best risk decision most often? And that's the goal that leaders, can carry. And so suddenly they're You know, risk management is about being more certain that people will make the best risk choice, not, you know, tell them how to be safe. It's a subtle shift that can only be done once you've got this foundation. So that is it for this video. What I'm going to do is go through some examples as a separate video, just because of the length of this one already. So there'll be a little sort of extra part that just talks about some of the practical examples of this. But thanks for watching so far. And then the one after that, we'll get into the implementation process. Thanks.